I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange. Hey there, spooky nerds, and welcome back to Talking Strange, the paranormal pop culture show. I'm Aaron Sagers, and hey, I'm still your host. And today we're going to be talking about Blood and Myth, the new documentary that is currently streaming on Hulu. And this is one that really captured my attention. Here's the official synopsis. I'll get into it. After a series of shocking violent crimes shatter a remote native village in northern Alaska, one man embarks on a journey to investigate a terrifying paranormal connection. So let's get into that a little bit more. Because when James Dommek Jr. learned of this string of bloody attacks in a remote Alaskan community, it seemed like to him that the details didn't add up. At the center of this rampage, let's call it, was this unlikely fugitive, Teddy Kyle Smith, who was a fellow indigenous man in Alaska and a successful actor. He was very admired in his community and within his tribe. So the mystery kind of deepens when Teddy is apprehended, and he makes a shocking claim. He says that while out in the wilderness, he had this frightening encounter with the Inukuns. These are these entities that some say are sinister, some say that it's more complicated than that, but they are treated with respect and sometimes fear by the indigenous tribes. And Teddy Kyle Smith said that they had guided his violent actions. So, to a lot of courts, sort of the Western courts, Teddy's tale really fell on deaf ears. But having grown up in the Arctic Circle, James Dommek knew all too well of these frightening stories of the little people, the wee folk, which connects to a lot of other cultures, as you would know. Anyhow, the existence of these Inukuns is accepted as fact by northern native communities, and really even supported by first-person accounts and sightings. So James was obsessed with this story, embarks on a journey back to the village to uncover the truth behind what Teddy allegedly saw in those mountains. That also, in addition to the shooting of these men who did survive, it also followed the mysterious death of Teddy's mother. So, James Dommek asked the question, was it possible that those myths from his childhood were true? And then in search of answers, he goes on this years-long odyssey to take him deep into the heart of this uncharted Alaskan territory where myth and reality collide, and where he must confront his own demons to unravel the mystery behind these Inukuns. So this is a true crime documentary, Blood and Myth. It's currently streaming on Hulu, and it's really a tale about identity, American dreams, and the dangers of veering too far from one's home. Blood and Myth is directed by Kahlil Hudson, and it is executive produced by James Dommek. And James also was known for his work on the audiobook, New York Times selling audiobook called Midnight Suns, about this case, as well as Alaska is the Center of the Universe. Both of those are exclusively on Audible. And Kahlil Hudson, who is the executive producer and director of Blood and Myth, was also Emmy-nominated HBO documentary series behind that one, Navajo Police Class 57. And he's worked in a number of other projects. So let's get to it. Let's hear from James Dommek Jr. and Kahlil Hudson about Blood and Myth. All right, executive producer James Dommek Jr. and director and EP Kahlil Hudson. Guys, thanks so much for joining me today to talk about Blood and Myth. I mean, obviously, I'm very much into this topic as it is, but this was a really fascinating documentary. And for something not that long ago, I was not familiar at all with this story. It kind of was hiding out there in plain sight. I I'm curious. I mean, James, tell me about that first moment. And you talk about this in the documentary, but tell me about the moment that you first learned about this case and involving someone that you were already familiar with Teddy Kyle Smith, and what that initial thought was that went through your mind, especially when you learned sort of about the kind of the folkloric connection to it.
In 2012, I started hearing about this story, from the newspapers, from the radio, from my family talking about it, other people in the film crew, and I just slowly started kind of uh, putting all the pieces together, and was just fascinated with it since day one. And I could see why other people weren't. Actually, I couldn't really understand why other people weren't seeing what I was seeing. Uh, as far as the story goes, and I think I want to say that there was maybe one Dateline or 60 Minutes type 2020 type story that was really like very journalistic and cookie cutter. I want to say that there was only one story I seen come out of this involving Teddy Smith and the Buckles and all that. And so yeah, I found it, and I wanted to tell it.
Yeah. Do you think the aversion to the story was because, I mean, why? Why do you think there was sort of an aversion to this story? Because on one hand, you could see this as being sort of a juicy news story of an actor that had gained prominence, local boy does good, and then commits is accused and convicted of committing these crimes, and then there's this Inukun kind of connection. I mean, you could see that being enough of a headline for a news magazine to really sink their teeth into. What do you think the aversion was?
I honestly, I don't really know. I just, there has been a lot of value in the past for indigenous stories and indigenous views. So I could see them just passing it up and just being, oh, that's woo woo, you
Yeah.
know. So
And of course, you go on to do the New York Times bestselling audiobook, Midnight Sun. And then, Kahlil, you come along and involved in this. What was your initial introduction and connection to this story and working with James on this?
Well, yeah, I was approached by James and one of the producers, and they sent me the audiobook, which I listened to in one sitting, and I loved it. Um, James, James really pops, I would say off the screen, but out of the earbuds, in the audiobook. And I loved it. I connected with it on a personal level. I'm Tlingit, which is a tribe in Southeast Alaska, and we don't have little people in our stories, but we do have similar beings. And so, the audiobook resonated with me on multiple levels. I mean, James's journey through the film industry, such that it was, and his, and Teddy's journey, mirrored mine somewhat, and so yeah, I really connected with it, and then when you're listening to the audiobook, you want to see James, you want to see the visuals of the clips from On the Ice, the film that Teddy acted in, or one of several films that he acted in. And and you want to see Big Bob. You want to see all of these characters, and you want to go to these places. What does Kayana look like? And so, yeah, I was mesmerized from day one. Um, and so we it took a while as these things do. It took a year and a half to kind of get prepped and get all the pieces in place to actually jump into production, and then we did.
James, your great grandfather was a storyteller.
Mhm.
Did you know him? Were you alive at the same time as him?
No, he died, I think maybe 10 years before I was born,
Yeah.
maybe more, but I've never met him. So
That storytelling tradition, obviously you are a storyteller yourself. Was that was that something that where do you feel like your skills kind of came from as far as being able to tell stories? Is there something that was sort of ingrained in you from your great grandfather, you think, or where do you think your own storytelling skills come from?
I'm not quite sure. I've seen a lot of movies, or read a lot of books, but I mean, watched a lot of movies. Uh, I never met my grandfather, but he did put all his stories into a book. An anthropologist went to the village in the 60s and hired an interpreter because he didn't, actually, it was maybe before that, but he hired an interpreter. He didn't speak English. And my great grandfather told the anthropologist all his stories. I think he saw value in recording them, or, getting them down on paper. Um, and so I was always told, and I was always given that book as a child. And I, was really fascinated with all Inuit legends and myths from all over the North, from Siberia to Alaska, Canada, Greenland. Really kind of obsessed with those stories, and also like survival stories, like wilderness survival stories, Alaskan survival stories. I've always loved those. And this story kind of scratched all those itches. It had the legends, it had this survival story, it's like those. So um, I know I read that book a bunch of times as a child, and even, as an adult. And I just felt connected to them in a way, in a strange way. And I don't know. I'm a huge fan of like the Coen brothers, and I kind of patterned a lot of stuff off of them. I love the way they tell stories, and so stuff like that.
Do you feel like you were situated as I'm watching the documentary? It feels like, of course, this is the perfect guy to tell this story. He comes from this storytelling tradition, but also is someone that has worked in the entertainment industry as a person that you would say, like, okay, this could be the person that Teddy would talk to, and also someone that understands a little bit of what it's like to move around in that world. Were you aware of how serendipitous your role was in this, as far as like, I am kind of the perfect person to tell this story?
It it all like that's why I always say the story found me, because I ended up with all these inside information that the newspapers and the radio weren't saying. I was getting inside information from the film crews. The Alaskan film crew had worked with Teddy. I was getting inside info from the Alaskan Native community up north about his behaviors and what he's up to. And then I was getting inside information from the mechanic community, the Paul Buckles, the airplane mechanic. My dad's a mechanic. They were buddies in the village up north when I was a kid. So these mechanics are visiting the Buckles at the hospital here in Anchorage. I was getting all this inside information, and I had all these facts, and I was like, what do I do with all this? And I just felt like if I didn't do something with it, it'd haunt me. I'd always regret it. Like, so it did feel serendipitous, and it still does. And I'm just glad I can't believe it's made it this far,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. So
I would assume Kahlil, from the director and also executive producer standpoint, when you have a character like James, you're like, okay, of course, this is what we're hanging our hat on as far as the story, driving the story.
Yeah. I mean, James is just as he likes to say, he's got the gift of gab. He's got a way with words, and he um I just wanted to add, because your last question was about where he got that from. his mom, who was in the film, I feel like he got a bit of storytelling chops from her. She's
Yeah.
she has a way with words as well. But yeah, I mean, that was what, absolutely, stuck out about the audiobook was James is at the center of this, the humor that he brings into the audiobook, and then just the parallels between Teddy and James. And that was something that we were like, yeah, let's keep what's good about the audiobook, and double down on it. Right. So yeah, that was absolutely, James was kind of keeping James as kind of our our storyteller, our point of view, and our way in made sense.
Kahlil, why is now a good time for this kind of story for Hulu? Obviously true crime does quite well, but why now for this kind of story?
Well, Hulu has been doing a lot of, they've been collaborating with a lot of native storytellers and telling native stories from, reservation dogs, to Prey, right? The Predator
Predator,
franchise
yeah.
film. And so I think they get it. They understand that there's a wealth of stories out there, to tell around, native stories. And I think, you know it was just kind of a perfect fit. I mean, Hulu does true crime and this sort of thing, even some of the kind of paranormal, even though we don't like to talk about this as a paranormal story necessarily. They do it quite well. It's kind of in their wheelhouse. So
Hmm.
it made sense for us to partner with them.
The in the town name, Kotsibo and Kiana. Am I saying that right? Or
Kotzebue and Kayana.
I got both of them wrong.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and I had my phonetics already set up and I clearly ignored those. But so, Teddy, his mother passes away, mysterious causes, still inconclusive, and then he's on the run for several days, and then there's the attempted murder of two men out there. How long was Teddy out on the run as well in the wilderness?
10 days.
10 days.
Well, it was 10 days from when he fled the scene in the village till when he was apprehended. So I don't know how many days he was at the cabin, but he was gone for 10 days.
Yeah. I am not an expert on delirium tremens, but it does seem like, we in the film you talk about sort of his alcoholism and substance abuse, but that seems like a long stretch of time that if he is hallucinating scene and he says that he encounters and is joined on this journey by the Inukuns, that's quite a long time for him to be out there if he was suffering from just delirium tremens, it would seem to me.
Yeah, he was a honorably discharged Marine. He was a really badass hunter, and he's just really, really familiar with the land.
Hmm.
Very comfortable out there in a very harsh place. So if anybody was going to, figure it out and get through it, it'd be someone like that who was trained by the government, trained by, and just also trained by, badass Inupiaq hunters. Yeah, it 10 days till when he was apprehended. I'm not quite sure. I'm not as familiar with those as well, but I don't know how long they last, but I don't know if it was that or what, but it was
Yeah.
just, options we were kind of exploring during, making this doc.
Talk about the challenges. I'd love to hear from both of you on this. The challenges of pursuing this story, because even if you're indigenous and going into these towns, these villages, and trying to tell this story, it seems like you run the risk of, you want to present this story and you want to be respectful about the beliefs and the people from these villages. But as you mentioned, the depiction within pop culture of Inuits is so often like exotic, superstitious, savage, even. Um, so, how you're pursuing this while also not falling into those tropes. And I could even imagine the people that are in those villages, even if you're local boys, may not want to talk about this because they're like, this is just going to reinforce these negative stereotypes about us. Am I wrong? Or talk about those challenges?
Yeah, there is a way the outside world sees us, and then there's the way we see ourselves, and there's the way that we understand the world around us up north. We're familiar with the Arctic, and it's just a completely different world. It's it's unlike any other place. It's a very harsh place to live. So, and our stories kind of match that. Um, I think that forced assimilation and colonization did a real number on our stories, our language, our way of life. And it really kind of put a hush on our stories. The church was very adamant about do not tell these stories, only learn the stories in the Bible. And so, you know, I'm from up there. I'm from the community. I'm in your same tribe, as Ted, and where all this took place, it happened on Inupiaq land. And so I was, making this is very aware of these stereotypes, but I also wanted to let the world know, like, this is what people talk about up north. These are the
Yeah.
stories that we tell, and if you don't understand it, if you lived in a city your whole life or in the suburbs your whole life, there's part of you that won't fully understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
To,
And
to,
I,
yeah.
and let me say, like, I happen to love it and love hearing these stories because as someone that researches this stuff, it is challenging because when you're not from the community, you can't just show up and say, "Hey, tell me your stories," because there's this long and unfortunate history of people co-opting them and then using it in these kind of exploitative ways. Whereas, for instance, I know there's tribes in the American Southwest that, will talk about things like Sasquatch and their spiritual beliefs around Sasquatch. They're talking about it, but not necessarily wanting to project those stories out there because of how it will impact like an already negative perception about some of those tribes. So that's kind of what I was wondering about the challenges wrapped up with that. Yeah.
There were a lot of people who had stories of weird encounters way out in the middle of nowhere, and they were very reluctant to talk
Yeah.
because they did not want to be perceived as, so they have jobs, they didn't want to be, they just didn't want to be perceived by their employment or from outsiders as somebody who has these beliefs. So it was a challenge for sure, but getting the people to open up and talk, yeah.
Did you want to add to that, Glenn?
Yeah, well, you have the stereotype that is probably the predominant stereotype of Inupiaq people, the Inupiaq living in igloos and wearing fur and those stereotypes that we brought into the film. And then you have the other stereotype of indigenous, Native Americans being having issues with substance abuse and violence, alcoholism. And we, we wanted to kind of dispel a little bit of both of those in this film. And we kind of tackle the first one directly in the film, and then kind of indirectly throughout the film, where we're showing James watching these films of, this Luden commercial, which little Easter egg there, one of the actors in that Luden's commercial is James's uncle.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we show James at home watching these commercials on his iMac, talking about his trip down to Brazil, where he's having to put on these furs and play Spirit Checker Jones, as he likes to say. And so we wanted to show how modern Inupiaq live. And and that's throughout. That's from showing James as, in his career as a drummer, touring the world. So these are modern. This is a modern Indigenous man, and then we wanted to show the complexity as well of, of kind of what all, external factors kind of contribute to some of the issues that with substance abuse that people have. And, there's no scientific predisposition to substance abuse or alcoholism, for Native people or any other ethnicity, right? Anyone can get addicted to alcohol, for example. But you have all of these external forces, these centuries of colonialism, and the whole message of the story is, and this isn't to excuse any of it, right? Any of what Teddy did, but it's just to kind of explain some of the factors that cause people to kind of self-medicate. And they're not, easy fixes either. So yeah, these are kind of some of the things that, and we knew that we were going to have to really balance these things, and not not give easy answers for them.
So while Teddy is out there in the wilderness leading up to the attempted murder of these two other hunters, he's encountering these wild people, these Inukuns that are described as big head, broad shoulders, dark, short, strong, leathery skin, communicating through whistles. His sister believes that he encountered these entities out there, these beings. What about the other people that you were speaking with, either from the village or just elsewhere? Is there overall support for Teddy or Teddy's story? Is there belief, do you think?
A lot of the Inupiaq people who I talked to, who I told this story about, before we made this, I told him the situation, where he was at, what time of year, and what he was doing. And based on those three things, the people who live in this part of the world think that it's not out of the realm of possibility that he had an encounter. In the fall time, when it gets dark, the caribou are close. They're close to the village. They're moving around. They migrate. They move all over the place. And that time of year, they're close. And in this part of Alaska, there's trees. There's not a lot of trees in the Arctic. There's trees and mountains in this part of the Arctic. So he was on foot, and he was trying to be elusive. And so most every Native person out there, in modern time, when we go out far into the backcountry, and it's massive, I'm talking just miles of nothing, we're always either on snow machines, four-wheelers, ATVs, boats, airplanes, helicopters. All these things are very loud. Not too many people just walk and go on that area. And so his story of his encounter is maybe the third or fourth story I've heard from that valley alone, the Squirrel River Valley. That's maybe the third or fourth story I've heard of encounters in that area. So the people up north who live up there and know these stories think that maybe, you know.
It seems like, I mean, you've lived with this story for a while now. Right now, today, as we're talking, and the documentary is out there, but and I know you've been asked this question before, and I know you talk about it in the documentary, but like, where do you sit right now with where his story was? Especially because, it's, spoiler, not spoiler, like you do talk to him in the film and he tells you his story again. Where are you at right now? What do you think?
I think that it's not out of the realm of possibilities that he had an encounter out there, as a complicated and flawed man as he is. Just for the reason, just because of the reason why he chose to talk about it, when he chose to talk about it. Um, yeah, I don't. I wanted to tell this story. I wanted to present both sides, and
Yeah.
just tell this amazing story of that came from my area of the world.
I don't want to, I don't want to, press you too much, but still, like, I speak to a lot of people. I've heard a lot of stories. There's some people that kind of, it strikes me as a little bit more compelling or credible than other stories. And we just get a sense, right? That bullshit meter is always kind of tuned in. So more than outside of the realm of possibility, I mean, are you leaning towards like, yeah, I think it doesn't justify it, but I think something happened to him out there. Can you go that far if that's the case?
Yeah, I'm not, I can't speak for Ted, I can't speak for him, but just based on the old stories that I know and the fact that Inuit people are spread over the whole top of the globe,
Yeah.
Siberia, Alaska, Canada, and Greenland, and we all have the same origin story for the Inukun, and they're known by many different names across the north. But we have this ancient origin story that predates any books or computers or internet or anything like that. And I don't know, it's a hard place to live up north. It's mostly based around survival and stuff. So if you don't have a lot of time to sit and stare at your belly button. And so the stories and the names for things, I don't know. They just if they took time, if the ancestors took time to name these things, and my people, my elders taught me how to behave when if in fact and I do see them, I just to me that's always just kind of lined up that there maybe is something out there we can't explain.
Hey man, I'll say like I don't know Teddy, but I've spoken to a lot of people that have strange stories out there, and also the stories that seem to persist in modern times across a multitude of cultures, across cultures. Some of them very similar, and I don't know. I find it compelling. I find it compelling. I also find it interesting because when you talk to him, it's not like he's blaming his actions on these entities and saying that's why I should get out of jail because the devil made me do it kind of thing. It's he's been reflective and sitting with this. It seems like his story hasn't changed. Teddy's story, even when he's in jail, this many years later, still thinks this thing happened and it is almost like instructive for him.
It always it always felt like, yeah, I agree. I don't, it always felt like it always felt like whatever he encountered out there kind of tore a hole in his reality. And by the time those two bear hunters got to the cabin, I'm not quite sure he knew what was real. If he saw something that was always told to him as a legend, and he is in fact seeing it, then it would human beings behave pretty different if there's something that's questioned their reality. That's the reason why the government won't, talk about the aliens and talk about any UFOs and stuff, because they have a feeling that if they release this kind of stuff, it would tear a hole in people's reality and people just do whatever they want.
It is a paradigm shift, and it's. I mean, Kahlil,
Paradigm shift.
what was? Did you have any kind of thoughts walking out of this project where you're like, yeah, I don't know, I think shit's up there. I think something's going on,
Yeah.
or not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, there really are three possibilities, right? There's the possibility that he's just flat out lying. And I pretty quickly dismissed that idea. Second possibility is that he hallucinated all this. I mean, he's on foot for 40 miles through some of the most unforgiving terrain in Alaska, and without food, with sweatshirt, right? He was not well provisioned. He's probably tired, probably not sleeping well. So there's a chance that he was hallucinating this. But and then the third possibility is that he had an encounter. I didn't necessarily start off this project as a skeptic, but I'm pretty skeptical by nature. I mean, I keep an open mind, but we interviewed so many people and just talked offline with so many people about Inukuns. I would say 100% everybody that lives in Guyana believes in Inukuns. I would say a vast majority of Inupiaq believe in Inukuns, that they exist. We interviewed, and why? Because everyone in the village has either had an encounter themselves or knows someone who has had an encounter. And we're talking about like actually interacting with Inukuns. We interviewed elders and other people that had direct interaction with Inukuns. And so I don't think these people are lying, you know. And so, whether or not Inukuns are, magical beings, whether they have incredible powers. I mean, maybe they have, are closer spiritually to traditional beliefs. But I came away, convinced that at some point, if they don't exist still today, they existed at some point in the very recent past, because we talked to people who had interactions with them within the last couple decades. So I was convinced.
Yeah.
To add to that too, there's been a number of non-native people who don't know our stories at all,
Mm-hmm.
who have had encounters, and they bring it back. I'm talking about bush pilots. I'm talking about military people, National Guard people doing training during the World War II. They trained all the natives in the village on the west part of Alaska to be the Alaska Territorial Guard. And in their reports, they send these men to go on a military exercise in the wintertime. These men come back early. The top brass says, "What are you doing?" I sent you on a mission. And they said, "We couldn't do the mission. There's these little wild men in the hills and they keep shooting arrows at us." So I'm talking diaries of missionaries, Quaker missionaries from the West Coast, from Pennsylvania, who go up north and try to be missionaries, and they're reading their diaries, and they have writings about that as well. So
yeah,
that's where it gets kind of where people or outsiders who don't even know our stories. These bush pilots flying, and they land in the village, and they say, "Hey, I saw something weird. I was coming over the part of this tundra right by this tree line. I thought I saw a group of caribou running. And then I got closer and I saw it was a bunch of people wearing caribou skin clothes running towards the tree line." There's still native people who wear these old type of parkies. We said nobody wears those anymore.
Yeah. I I and I know we're running down on time. I still want to get to a couple other questions. I just want to it's fascinating to me because from a different realm, like the Kushtaka, like I've spent some time up there, and I was telling Kahlil before you joined that I had two brothers that lived up in Alaska for an extended period of time as well. Not the far north where a lot of this story takes place, but when you go researching something like Kushtaka, like it's fascinating because people don't want to talk about it. Because even by talking about it, it's like you're inviting potentially something in. But a lot of the responses I got were like, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about that right now. If you want to talk about that somewhere else, maybe we could talk about it a little bit. But just that belief is there, but also the reluctance to talk about it, not even necessarily for fear of being made fun of, but for we just don't observe it. Although the fear of being ridiculed is there too, and that's an interesting bit of like racism that takes place, because if we're kind of trained culturally to have offer more leeway to someone that says they're having a vision of a Christian saint or the Virgin Mary or Jesus or whatever, um, and yet when it's coming from this indigenous perspective, it's more likely to be lumped into the fancies of, those native people. Is that accurate?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, it's these popular religions on the, yeah, especially Christianity.
Yeah.
They're allowed this miraculous stuff. People kind of, they don't write it off as much. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you make of this footage? And honestly, I want to see like a whole other story about this specifically because it's so mind blowing. Honestly, the Bureau of Land Management, the national parks, where as they're doing flyovers, they see what looks like these rock settlements, sacred sites, and formations that are not in line with what indigenous people would build their homes around. What do you guys make of this flyover footage, what it is, and just your reaction upon seeing these things? Kahlil, you start, and then James, I want to hear from you.
Yeah, well, James texted me the video and the photo from Mary Black as soon as he got them, and I freaked out, right?
Freaking wild.
It's wild. And it makes sense though, right? If I mean, we kind of touch on this in the film, but like if there's any area of North America left where there could still be an uncontacted tribe still kind of living in secrecy, it would be here. It's hundreds of miles of pristine wilderness with not a road, not a footpath to be seen. And I've flown all over the Brooks Range, and it's just you can fly for hours without seeing a single sign of humanity. And so when you see these homes, they're clearly different from traditional Inupiaq homes. And the doors and windows are small, but what's wild is that the BLM has kind of cordoned off this area and is forbidding people from visiting until they get a full kind of assessment of what these homes are, and it's within this 400-foot easement that they're trying to get for this Ambler Road to kind of plow through this pristine wilderness. And so if this is helping to block that road from going in, I'm happy about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The homes are, where she found them. What she told me was that those are just one little section. She said farther up the valley, there was a similar little area with 4 or 5. And then farther up the creek, a little bit more up the valley, there was a couple more. And, I'm hearing from my family from Notak, who saw the documentary, and they're saying, oh yeah, when we were way up the Notak River, way up by the mountains in there, we looked with our binoculars up on the side of the mountain and we saw these same rock huts. And this is all in the area where all these sightings occur. We don't know exactly where these things are. She never gave us any coordinates. We just know that the BLM they put like a 5 or 10 mile buffer around the whole area. No one's allowed over there. So I don't know where they are exactly. But yeah, it blew my mind. And
I feel like we could find him. I feel like we could find him though.
yeah, we might.
It's one of those things that you want to understand the mystery, but I also kind of want the mystery to remain. Like I kind of don't want us to poke around too much on it, but
Yeah.
and yet I also want to know what it is. The just I guess just a couple final questions, but the looking ahead, what you, what do you think about Teddy's case moving forward? I mean, what would you like to see happen? Because he was convicted, he's been serving time. He's not saying that he didn't do this, even though he has to be cautious about what he does say. The cause of his mother's death remains inconclusive. So what next? What would you like to see happen, James?
Well, Ted, he's already exhausted all of his appeals through all three of the courts. And so, I was when I was making the story, I was never under the I was never trying to get him out of jail. I think if you shoot two people with a pistol, you should be in jail. I don't know what happened with his mother. I think that some of the people in the village, they think that's their guess. This is alleged, but they think maybe he scared her to death. And she gave up the ghost, biblically speaking. But I don't know. I think that him talking about what happened to him out there didn't necessarily help his case. I mean, he could have talked about anything as soon as he got to the trooper station. He could have said, "Hey, I didn't kill my mom." He could have said, "Hey, those bear hunters were trying to attack me. I was in self-defense." He could have said something about that. Instead, he just started talking immediately about his experience out there.
Right. Yeah,
So
it's not really the thing you go to when you're trying to present the best view of your own sanity. You could just leave that part out. So it
that's
was,
what I'm saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
interesting that he went with that. Um, for both of you, I mean, I really do love hearing about these stories, and this is a true crime story, but we're also, the stories, the folklore, and everything behind it. Do either of you have interest in pursuing more in this realm, and exploring these tales from indigenous cultures? Kahlil, is this something that you're gonna do more of?
It's funny because I I texted James an article um, that is a true crime story that involves Kushtaka from my area in Southeast Alaska. It was just a couple of days ago, and just said, "Hey, what do you think?" We haven't talked about it, but yet. But yes, I think I think that that I would be interested in doing more stories around this. For me, I think there really needs to be something more. Like for me, this story had more layers to it. The fact that we were able to kind of like work in some, more kind of social justicey sort of angles with talking about the the judicial system in rural Alaskan villages. I think that is a cause that needs to continue being fought, right? That the Western form of the judicial system doesn't look really anything like the traditional Inupiaq justice system, and I think that there's a growing movement to give more agency and sovereignty to tribes to be able to kind of litigate their own cases, and inform tribal courts. And I think that something like that kind of, for me, elevates this story, where we're able to kind of talk about some of the problems that that have real solutions.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love true crime. I'm a big consumer of true crime, and so yeah, I would love to do more.
Yeah. James, how about you? I mean, specifically with the folklore and the
Yeah.
legend stories.
I did another project for Audible called Alaska's the Center of the Universe.
Right.
And that's essentially a travel show for indigenous stories. But for Alaska Center of the Universe, I go and talk to the 6 main tribes in Alaska, and not just my tribe. I talk to all the other ones and talk to people, hunters, people, villagers who have had, experienced some weird things out there. I talked to people in the Southeast about Kushtaka. It was very hard. They would not talk about it. Some people wouldn't even want me to say the name if the sun was down. It was very hard to get them to talk about. But I don't know. I hope there's more work. Yeah, I hope this leads to more work. To me, that defines my level of success. I've been looking for other, true crime stuff in my area of the world. They say write what you know, and I know Alaska, and so I'm looking into that. But I haven't found anything as amazing as this story, as layered as this story.
Gentlemen, I was really fascinated by this story. I thought it was just the kind of thing that I get into, because we are talking about different cultures and we don't put enough of a spotlight on indigenous cultures, and not just the social justice, the beliefs, all of it together. So this was a really interesting documentary, and I appreciate your time today talking about it. So I look forward to seeing more from you, and best of luck with Blood and Myth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
And that was James Dommek Jr. and Kahlil Hudson about Blood and Myth, talking about Blood and Myth, the true crime documentary with the paranormal twist that is currently streaming on Hulu. Curious to get your take on this. I found this to be a really fascinating documentary, and I do like exploring these cases, these stories, these strange stories from other communities, other cultures that we don't hear enough about. And this whole case I just find so strange, this Teddy Kyle Smith case, because this was not a man that it just seemed like this thing just happened out of nowhere. What do you think about the Inukuns? I mean, when you kind of strip them of the name, the descriptors of these wee folk that can be seem either malicious or malevolent, but also perhaps guides, perhaps these entities that we don't fully understand, but they come across as quite scary. It does sound like other folklore that is out there in other cultures. So what did you think about this case? Sound off? Let me know, and also share your stories. You can hit me up at contact@talkingstrange.com and send your stories in. I love to hear them, and I love to share them. Okay. So I forgot to mention at the top of this, in case this background looks a little bit different, I'm currently in the midst of the Spooky Explorers Club, an event, community event, spooky and paranormal event at Disney, at Walt Disney World in Orlando, where we gather together and we talk about legends and lore around Disney and around the Orlando area. And then we also have fun by going into the theme parks. This is our second time, so I'm recording this currently from a room at the Contemporary Resort on the Disney property. Very excited about this. We're also going to be doing a Tiki Bar takeover. That's also pretty awesome at Permanent Vacation. So check that out if you've not been to Permanent Vacation. But also check out SpookyExplorersClub.com if you want to join the next trip. Okay, friends? In the meantime, this has been Talking Strange. I have been and remain Aaron Sagers. Until next time, be kind, stay spooky, and keep it weird.